The Montana wilderness stretched endless and wild around Evergreen Ranch as 6 armed men approached through the morning mist, their motorcycles growling like predators on the hunt. They couldn't have known that the seemingly humble rancher tending to his horses, Thomas "Quiet Tom" Harrison, was once known as Ghost Scope, the deadliest sniper in the Marine Corps, with confirmed kills at distances that seemed impossible. Their fatal mistake would cost them everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp autumn morning painted Whispering Pines Valley in shades of gold and amber as the notorious Carson Brothers made their way along the winding dirt road toward Evergreen Ranch. Leading the pack was Marcus Carson, whose face bore a distinctive scar from his time in Folsom Prison, a reminder of the 3 men he'd killed during a riot with nothing but a sharpened toothbrush. His younger brother Derek rode beside him, methodically cleaning the scope of a high-powered hunting rifle that had already claimed 4 lives during their recent string of ranch robberies. Behind them, their loyal followers maintained a tight formation that spoke of careful planning. Jack the Scout Torres, whose time in Special Forces had taught him to read terrain like others read books, constantly scanned the tree line with practiced precision. The massive frame of Boyd Bulldozer Miller rumbled forward on a reinforced motorcycle, while the youngest members of their crew, the trigger-happy Tucker twins, brought up the rear, eager to prove themselves worthy of the gang's bloody reputation. Marcus Carson had chosen Evergreen Ranch carefully. The modest spread sat nestled in a remote corner of Whispering Pines Valley, its 100 acres of prime grazing land, a testament to years of hard work. Their surveillance suggested a simple operation, one aging rancher living alone, his only regular visitors being the local veterinarian and occasional supply deliveries. The property's isolation made it perfect for their particular brand of violence. As they passed the weathered wooden sign marking the ranch's boundary, Marcus noticed the owner in the corral, a lean man in his 50s, methodically working with a young horse. Thomas Harrison moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime around animals, his reading glasses catching the morning light as he checked the horse's hooves. His rifle, an old Winchester, leaned against the fence post out of reach, a mistake no experienced rancher should make in such wild country. "Look at our lucky winner," Derek sneered, loud enough to carry across the still morning air. "Probably doesn't even know which end of that rifle to hold." The gang's laughter echoed off the surrounding hills, but Marcus remained quiet, studying the scene with the instinct that had kept him alive through countless robberies and assaults. What the Carson brothers couldn't see was how Harrison's weathered hands, now gentle with the horse, had once steadied a Barrett M82 through 3 days of waiting for a single crucial shot in Fallujah. They didn't notice how his eyes, behind those wire-rimmed glasses, tracked their every movement with the same precision that had once earned him the nickname Ghost Scope, the sniper other snipers spoke of in whispers. Inside the small ranch house, Dr. Sarah Chen watched the scene unfold through her kitchen window, her hand instinctively reaching for the satellite phone Harrison had insisted she keep nearby. As the local veterinarian, she knew pieces of Harrison's past that he'd shared during long evenings treating injured horses, had seen the precision shooting trophies hidden away in his study, though he'd made her promise never to speak of them. The Carson brothers tied their motorcycles near the barn, the rubber tires crunching on gravel as they dismounted. They didn't notice how Harrison's hand had stilled on the horse's flank, didn't see the slight shift in his posture that would have told any combat veteran that a predator was preparing to strike. They remained ignorant of the fact that for the first time in 7 years, the legendary marksman felt the familiar tension of an approaching storm. Young Billy Waters watched from the shelter of the woodshed where he'd been stacking logs, his heart racing. As Harrison's part-time ranch hand, he discovered more about his employer than most, had witnessed the older man practicing at dawn, making shots that seemed to defy physics. His grandfather, retired Sheriff James Waters, had warned him never to mention the time he'd seen Harrison put 5 rounds through the same hole at 400 yards, shooting from positions that made Olympic marksmen look like amateurs. As the barn door swung shut behind the Carson brothers, Harrison carefully removed his glasses, folding them with deliberate precision. His movements, though unhurried, carried an underlying grace that seemed at odds with his rancher's appearance. He nodded slightly to Dr. Chen through the window, a silent signal developed over months of careful preparation. Sarah understood. It was time to quietly withdraw to the reinforced cellar Harrison had insisted on building, claiming it was just for storing veterinary supplies. The autumn wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow from the distant mountains. In the corral, Thomas' ghost scope, Harrison felt the familiar clarity settling over him, the same focused calm that had once made him a legend among Marine scout snipers. The Carson brothers had chosen his ranch as their next target, but they had no idea they were walking into the kill zone of a man who had turned precision shooting into an art form. Their mistake would prove to be their last. The notorious Carson brothers hadn't always been predators. Their descent into violence began in the coal mining towns of West Virginia, where their father's death in a mining accident left them with nothing but bitter memories and a burning desire for revenge against a system they believed had failed them. Marcus Carson, the eldest, learned his first lessons about power in the concrete jungle of Folsom Prison, where survival meant becoming the very thing society feared most. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw told a story that had become almost mythical in criminal circles. During the bloodiest prison riot in Folsom's history, Marcus had found himself trapped in cell block D with 3 members of a rival gang. Armed with nothing but a sharpened toothbrush, he emerged alive while his attackers didn't. The incident earned him not just the scar, but a reputation that would become the foundation of his criminal empire. Derek Carson, younger by 4 years, possessed a different kind of darkness. Where Marcus learned violence in prison, Derek discovered his talent for cruelty in the seemingly innocent world of competitive shooting. His skill with a rifle was undeniable, but it was his enjoyment of the power it gave him that worried even his brother. The hunting rifle he now carried had begun its journey as a legitimate competition weapon before being turned to darker purposes. Each of its 4 documented kills had been made at ranges that impressed even experienced marksmen, though Derek cared more for the fear his reputation inspired than the technical achievement. The Carson brothers had transformed their small-time gang into a sophisticated criminal operation by targeting isolated ranches across 5 states. Their methodology was as precise as it was brutal. Jack Torres, their scout, would spend weeks studying potential targets, using the skills he'd learned in special forces to analyze security weaknesses and escape routes. His military background should have taught him to recognize the subtle signs of a fellow veteran, but pride had made him careless. The defensive modifications to Harrison's ranch had registered as nothing more than the paranoid preparations of an isolated rancher. Boyd "Bulldozer" Miller brought more than just intimidating size to the operation. His experience as a demolitions expert in the mining industry made him invaluable for accessing the safes and strong rooms where remote ranches often kept their cash. The massive man had learned early that his size alone could generate compliance, but it was his expertise with explosives that made him truly dangerous. He'd already rigged the charges around Harrison's barn, hidden beneath innocent-looking equipment, unaware that he was playing chess with a man who had spent years anticipating such moves. The Tucker twins, Adam and Alex, represented the new generation of the gang's evolution. Barely 23, they had grown up idolizing the Carson brothers' exploits. Their youth made them reckless, their eagerness to prove themselves making them more dangerous than their seasoned counterparts. They had yet to learn that enthusiasm without wisdom was a fatal combination in their line of work. Their matching Glock pistols, carried in custom shoulder holsters, had already taken 3 lives in the past month alone. What separated the Carson brothers from common criminals was their understanding of psychological warfare. Each raid began with a show of overwhelming force, but it was their reputation that did the real damage. Stories of their previous victims circulated through ranch country like modern folklore tales of defiance met with calculated brutality, of ransoms paid that didn't prevent the promised consequences. They had turned terror into a science, never realizing that they were about to encounter a man who had mastered far deadlier forms of combat psychology. Marcus Carson's tactical approach had been honed through 7 successful ranch raids, each more profitable than the last. They targeted properties just small enough to lack serious security, but large enough to have substantial cash reserves. Modern ranching still operated largely on physical currency, a fact the brothers had exploited with increasing precision. Evergreen Ranch fit their criteria: perfectly remote location, minimal staff, and an owner who seemed more concerned with his horses than security. The gang had spent 3 weeks studying Harrison's routines, logging the comings and goings of the few visitors he received. Dr. Sarah Chen's regular visits to tend to the horses were noted but dismissed as irrelevant. The presence of young Billy Waters was seen as an advantage hostages made for useful leverage. Even the reinforced cellar had been observed, marked as a potential strongroom to be breached. Every detail was catalogued with professional thoroughness, yet they had missed the most crucial element of all: the true nature of the quiet rancher they planned to rob. What the Carson brothers could never have known was that they weren't the first predators to stalk Thomas Harrison. During his time as a Marine scout sniper, he had played deadlier games of cat and mouse with targets who had decades more experience than these self-styled outlaws. The patience that made him seem like an easy target was the same patience that had once allowed him to wait 3 days for a single crucial shot. His skills earning him the highest confirmed kill count in his unit's history. The autumn sun climbed higher over Whispering Pines Valley as the Carson brothers prepared to execute their carefully planned raid. They had no way of knowing that every step they took followed a path Thomas Harrison had anticipated years ago when he first chose this remote ranch as his refuge from a violent past. The very isolation that made them confident would prove to be their undoing, as they were about to learn that the deadliest predators were often the ones that seemed most harmless. In the barn, Marcus Carson began outlining their usual approach to his crew, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to absolute obedience. Outside, Harrison continued his unhurried work with the horses, his movements betraying nothing of the combat-honed instincts that were already calculating ranges, angles, and fields of fire. The stage was set for a confrontation that would remind the world why some legends are born not from seeking violence, but from mastering its darkest arts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What appeared to be a simple Montana ranch revealed itself as something far more sophisticated to those who knew where to look. Thomas Harrison hadn't chosen Evergreen Ranch by chance 7 years ago. The property's natural features had spoken to the sniper in him. The rolling terrain that created perfect sightlines, the elevated positions that commanded views of every approach, and the deep shadows of the pine forest that could conceal a patient hunter indefinitely. The reinforced cellar that Dr. Sarah Chen now quietly made her way toward wasn't merely a storage space for veterinary supplies. Harrison had designed it as a hardened shelter, its walls strengthened with steel plate salvaged from an old military surplus sale. The heavy door, disguised to look like common ranch equipment, could withstand anything short of military-grade explosives. Inside, a small but comprehensive medical station stood ready, stocked with supplies that went well beyond treating horses. Sarah had helped compile the inventory, drawing on her emergency medicine rotation during veterinary school. Tom never does anything without purpose, Sarah reflected as she secured the cellar's door, remembering the day 3 years ago when Harrison had first revealed glimpses of his true background. She'd been treating a difficult case, a horse with a badly broken leg, when Harrison had assisted her with a precision that spoke of extensive combat medical experience. That night, over coffee, he'd shared just enough of his past for her to understand why he kept a trauma kit worthy of a combat hospital hidden beneath his seemingly simple ranch. Young Billy Waters moved silently through the morning shadows toward his assigned position, his movements showing the results of Harrison's careful mentoring. What the Carson brothers had dismissed as simple ranch work had actually been careful training, learning to move quietly over rough terrain, understanding wind patterns, and mastering the art of remaining unseen in plain sight. Harrison had chosen Billy as his assistant, not just for his strength with ranch work, but for his ability to learn and keep secrets. The barn, which the gang had so casually occupied, was far from the simple structure it appeared to be. Harrison had redesigned it using principles learned in urban warfare. The heavy support beams weren't just for structural integrity. They were positioned to create natural shooting lanes and cover positions. The high loft windows, which seemed placed for ventilation, had been carefully calculated to provide optimal firing positions while minimizing exposure. Even the arrangement of hay bales and equipment followed a deliberate pattern, creating corridors that could channel movement in predictable ways. Throughout the ranch, Harrison had positioned supplies and equipment with tactical precision. What looked like random tools scattered around the property were actually cached weapons and ammunition, each placed within easy reach of predetermined defensive positions. The old Winchester leaning against the corral fence wasn't his only rifle. It was merely the one he allowed to be seen. Hidden throughout the property, in waterproof cases disguised as common ranch equipment, lay the tools of his former trade: a custom M40A5 sniper rifle, several Marine-issue M4 carbines, and his pride, the Barrett M82 that had earned him his reputation in Fallujah. Dr. Chen had helped Harrison maintain this hidden arsenal, using her veterinary credentials to legally obtain cleaning supplies and components that might otherwise have drawn attention. She understood that for Harrison, these preparations weren't about paranoia. They were about responsibility. The same skills that once took lives, he'd told her during one of their late-night conversations, can also protect them. It's not about seeking violence, it's about being ready when violence seeks you. The ranch's security systems went far beyond simple preparations. Harrison had installed passive infrared sensors at key points around the property, their presence hidden by seeming to be part of the electric fence system for the horses. Solar-powered cameras disguised as birdhouses covered every approach. Even the ranch's horses played a role in the defense network. Their behavior, in response to strangers, had been carefully trained to provide early warning without being obvious about it. Billy Waters had discovered much of this infrastructure gradually over the 2 years he'd worked at the ranch. Harrison had trained him not just in ranch work, but in understanding the principles behind each preparation. Everything serves two purposes, Harrison had explained, while teaching him to maintain the hidden security systems. A good defense doesn't look like defense at all. It looks like everyday life. The Carson brothers, despite their careful surveillance, had missed the subtle signs that would have warned more experienced observers. They hadn't noticed how the ranch's fence lines provided interlocking fields of fire, or how the scattered equipment created natural barriers that could channel movement. They had failed to recognize that the seemingly random patterns of daily ranch work actually maintained clear lanes of fire around critical approaches. Most crucially, they had misread Harrison himself. In him, they saw an aging rancher who spent more time with horses than people. They didn't see the combat veteran who had turned his entire property into a carefully crafted defensive position, using skills honed through years of warfare to create a fortress that didn't look like one. His apparent isolation wasn't weakness, it was tactical advantage. His gentle manner with animals wasn't softness. It was the same patience that had once allowed him to wait, motionless for days, to take a crucial shot. As the morning sun climbed higher, Harrison continued his seemingly casual work with the horses, each movement carefully positioning him to maintain awareness of the barn where the Carson brothers plotted. 7 years of peace hadn't dulled his instincts. They had merely given him time to perfect his preparations. The trap was set, though it looked nothing like a trap to those about to spring it on themselves. In the coming hours, the Carson brothers would learn why some of the deadliest predators in nature appear to be the most harmless, right up until the moment they strike. The Carson brothers' initial show of force unfolded with practiced precision inside Harrison's barn. Marcus Carson took center stage, his scarred face twisted in a predatory smile as he outlined their demands to his crew. Boyd Miller had already begun placing his charges at key structural points, while the Tucker twins positioned themselves near the windows, their matched Glocks drawn and ready. Jack Torres maintained his watch on the perimeter, his military training evident in how he established clear lines of sight. What they saw as tactical preparation, Harrison recognized as predictable patterns. Through the reflection in his horse's water trough, he tracked their movements while maintaining his seemingly casual work. Every position they took, every defensive arrangement they made, spoke volumes to his combat-trained mind. Their confidence in their own abilities had made them careless, choosing obvious positions that any experienced shooter would expect. Derek Carson emerged from the barn first, his customized hunting rifle held with the casual arrogance of someone who believed himself the most dangerous marksman in the valley. "Time to talk business, old man," he called out, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Let's discuss how this plays out, with minimal fuss." The words might have sounded reasonable, but Harrison caught the underlying anticipation of violence in the younger Carson's tone. Inside the reinforced cellar, Dr. Sarah Chen monitored the situation through a carefully concealed observation system. Harrison's foresight had included installing small cameras that provided crucial viewpoints of the property. She watched as Boyd Miller discovered the ranch's safe in the tack room, exactly where Harrison had wanted it to be found. The massive man's eyes lit up at the sight of the formidable steel box, never suspecting it was merely the first piece in a more elaborate trap. The Tucker twins grew bolder, beginning to vandalize equipment with theatrical brutality. They knocked over carefully arranged tools, shot holes in water barrels, and slashed at hay bales with combat knives. Each act of destruction followed a pattern Harrison had seen before. Young predators establishing dominance through casual violence. What they didn't realize was that every movement drew them further into pre-sighted firing positions. "Your reputation for handling horses is impressive," Marcus Carson said, emerging from the barn with the calculated menace that had broken so many others. "But I wonder if you're as good with people." He approached Harrison directly, ignoring how the older man's movements had become perfectly still. "We've done our homework. Monthly supply runs to Preston's Crossing, regular visits from the vet, the occasional delivery of hay and feed. All paid in cash, which means you keep money on hand." Harrison maintained his calm demeanor. Though his mind was already calculating angles and distances, he recognized the technique Carson was using, establishing dominance through detailed knowledge of the target's routine. It was the same approach he'd once used to understand his own target's patterns, but Carson's implementation was clumsy, revealing more about his own limitations than he realized. "The safe in your tack room," Marcus continued, gesturing toward the barn. "Our friend Boyd is working on it now. Save us all some time and give us the combination." His hand rested casually on his holstered pistol, the gesture meant to emphasize the threat without making it explicit. Cooperation makes everything easier. Just ask the Whitaker family up in Idaho. Oh wait, you can't. They weren't cooperative. Young Billy Waters, hidden in his assigned position, felt his heart race at the casual mention of violence. Through the scope of the rifle Harrison had positioned for him, he could see every detail of the unfolding scene. His hands were steady, though, just as Harrison had taught him. Fear is natural, Harrison's words echoed in his memory. Control it by focusing on your role, your training, your purpose. Jack Torres, conducting his perimeter sweep, approached the woodshed where Billy had been working earlier. His Special Forces training made him thorough, but 7 years of civilian life had dulled the edge that might have helped him spot the subtle signs of recent movement. He passed within 10 feet of Billy's position without detecting the young man's presence, proving that Harrison's lessons in concealment had taken root. The morning wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the scent of pine and sage. Harrison noted the change automatically, his mind adjusting shooting calculations even as he maintained his appearance of concerned compliance. "The safe," he said, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age that he'd cultivated as part of his cover. "Please, there's no need for violence. I can open it for you." Derek Carson laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the morning air. Finally, some sense from the old man. He turned to his brother with a triumphant grin. "See, sometimes they can be taught." The younger Carson's grip on his rifle relaxed slightly, another small tell that Harrison filed away for later use. Boyd Miller's voice boomed from inside the barn. "Boss, this safe's something else. Gonna take more time than usual to crack it." The frustration in his tone was evident, and Harrison allowed himself a small internal smile. The safe had been specifically chosen for its complexity. Another piece in his elaborate preparation. Marcus Carson's face darkened at the news. "Looks like we're going to be here a while, old man." He gestured to the Tucker twins. "Search the house. Find anything that might speed up our friend's cooperation." The younger men moved with predatory eagerness, unaware they were walking into carefully prepared fields of fire. What happened next would remind everyone present why some of the deadliest ambush predators in nature appear completely harmless right up until the moment they strike. The Carson brothers had chosen their target believing they were the most dangerous things in the valley. They were about to learn just how wrong that assumption had been. As the Tucker twins disappeared into his house, Thomas Harrison's mind drifted momentarily to another time, another place, where the stakes had been equally high, but the terrain far different. The streets of Fallujah had taught him lessons that would soon prove invaluable. In that urban maze of broken buildings and hidden threats, he had learned that patience was more lethal than aggression, and preparation more decisive than raw skill. The memory that surfaced now was particularly relevant, a 3-day operation that had earned him the nickname Ghost Scope. His target had been a high-ranking insurgent commander who had grown overconfident in his own security measures. Harrison had waited motionless for 72 hours, enduring heat, thirst, and exhaustion for the perfect shot. That same patience now kept his hands steady as he watched the Carson brothers make the same mistake his previous targets had made, believing that power meant invulnerability. Dr. Sarah Chen, monitoring the situation from the reinforced cellar, remembered the night Harrison had first shared details of that mission. It had been during a difficult foaling, when a mare's complications had forced them to work through the darkness. Something about the focused intensity required for the medical procedure had reminded him of those long hours in Fallujah. The hardest part wasn't the shot, he had told her, his hands steady as they worked to save the mare and foal. It was choosing to wait when every instinct screamed for action. Inside the house, the Tucker twins were discovering that Harrison's apparent simplicity extended to his living space. The ranch house's interior presented an image of modest functionality, worn furniture, basic amenities, and few personal touches. What they failed to notice was how every piece of furniture had been positioned to create natural barriers and shooting lanes. How every window offered carefully calculated fields of fire to covered positions outside. Marcus Carson's voice cut through Harrison's memories. "Boyd says your safe is military grade. Interesting choice for a simple rancher." His tone carried an edge of growing suspicion, almost like you were expecting trouble. The scarred man studied Harrison's face, looking for any reaction that might confirm his emerging doubts. Harrison allowed a slight tremor to enter his voice as he responded, maintaining his carefully crafted persona. "Found it at a surplus auction. The salesman said it was reliable." The lie came easily, crafted from 7 years of maintaining his cover. The safe was indeed military grade. He'd chosen it specifically because he knew how Boyd Miller would approach it, how long it would take to breach. In his hidden position, Billy Waters remembered the day he'd helped Harrison install that safe. The older man had been precise in his instructions about its placement, about the exactly angles of approach available to anyone attempting to crack it. At the time, Billy had assumed it was just the thoroughness of an experienced rancher. Now, watching the drama unfold, he understood it had been the planning of a combat veteran preparing his battlefield. Derek Carson grew increasingly agitated as his brother's suspicion became more evident. His rifle moved with nervous energy, betraying his growing unease. "Something's not right here, Marcus," he muttered, just loud enough for Harrison to hear. "Everything's too neat, too organized." His military experience, though limited to failed attempts at basic training, was finally registering the subtle wrongness of their situation. Jack Torres, still conducting his perimeter sweep, was beginning to notice similar inconsistencies. His special forces background was finally breaking through years of civilian complacency, recognizing patterns that his conscious mind hadn't yet processed. The placement of equipment, the arrangement of structures, the clear lines of sight, it all spoke of tactical consideration that went far beyond routine ranch management. Harrison watched these realizations dawn on his opponents' faces, remembering similar moments from his time as a sniper. There was always a point in an operation when the target began to sense the trap, when instinct warned of danger, even if logic couldn't explain why. In Fallujah, he had learned to recognize these moments, to use them to his advantage. Uncertainty made people predictable. Fear made them careless. From the house came the sound of breaking glass, the Tucker twins taking out their frustration on Harrison's modest possessions. The noise made Marcus Carson wince slightly, his control over the situation showing its first cracks. Professional criminals didn't make unnecessary noise, didn't draw attention without purpose. The younger members of his crew were departing from the careful protocol that had made their previous raids successful. Boyd Miller's voice carried from the barn again, tinged with growing frustration. "This safe's got tricks I ain't seen before, boss. Might need to use the heavy stuff." The admission carried more significance than the gang realized. Harrison had chosen that specific model, knowing it would resist conventional methods, forcing them to consider more explosive alternatives. Each minute they spent focusing on the safe was another minute for his plans to mature. Dr. Chen watched through the cellar's monitoring system as the tactical situation continued to develop. She understood now why Harrison had spent so many hours teaching her to read body language, to recognize the signs of mounting tension in both humans and animals. The Carson Brothers crew was showing the same stress indicators she'd learned to watch for in horses before they spooked. The subtle shifts in posture, the nervous energy, the heightened awareness of their surroundings. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn mist. Harrison felt the familiar clarity of combat awareness settling over him, the same focused state that had once allowed him to execute impossible shots under extreme conditions. The Carson brothers had unwittingly initiated a confrontation that would remind the world why some of the most effective predators in nature were the ones that appeared most docile until the moment they struck. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily on the thermal currents rising from the valley floor. Harrison tracked its movement automatically, noting wind direction and speed, adding these calculations to his mental preparation. Soon, very soon, the Carson brothers would learn the same lesson his targets in Fallujah had learned, that the deadliest person in any confrontation wasn't always the most obviously dangerous. The community surrounding Evergreen Ranch had always understood more about Thomas Harrison than they let on. Sheriff James Waters, watching the situation unfold through his binoculars from a concealed position 3 miles away, remembered the day Harrison had first arrived in Whispering Pines Valley. The former Marine's background check had revealed enough to make the veteran law enforcement officer recognize a fellow warrior seeking peace, though the deepest parts of Harrison's military record remained classified. In his hidden observation post, Waters maintained radio silence, trusting in the plans they had developed over years of quiet preparation. His grandson, Billy, wasn't the only one Harrison had trained. The sheriff and several trusted deputies had spent countless hours learning from the former sniper, turning the entire valley into an interlocking network of observation posts and response positions. Today, those preparations would prove their worth. Dr. Sarah Chen's role went far beyond that of a simple veterinarian. Her regular visits to Evergreen Ranch had created a perfect cover for coordinating with the broader community. Local ranchers, hunters, and even the high school's shooting team had all played parts in Harrison's careful preparations, though none knew the full scope of his planning. They simply understood that the quiet rancher who helped train their children in marksmanship and gun safety was someone worth protecting. Inside the house, the Tucker twins' destructive search had revealed nothing of value. The family photos on the walls showed Harrison with various community members at local rodeos, county fairs, and charity events. What the young criminals failed to recognize was how these images mapped out a network of relationships, each person in those photos representing another strand in the web of support Harrison had carefully woven around his new home. Marcus Carson's growing unease manifested in his increasingly aggressive posture. "Your reputation with horses brings people from all over the state," he said, his voice carrying forced casualness. "Must be profitable work." What he didn't know was that Harrison's expertise with horses was more than just a cover. It was a deliberate choice that allowed him to build relationships throughout the region while maintaining his low profile. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen accessed a secure communication system Harrison had installed years ago. The equipment, disguised as standard veterinary monitoring gear, allowed her to maintain contact with key members of their support network. She watched through the monitoring system as Martha Reynolds, owner of the local feed store, quietly coordinated the evacuation of outlying farms. The elderly woman had been one of the first to recognize Harrison's true nature, having seen similar qualities in her late husband, a Vietnam-era sniper. Boyd Miller's frustrated voice carried from the barn again. "This whole setup feels wrong, boss. Everything's too perfect, too planned." The demolitions expert's instincts were finally registering what his conscious mind had missed. The subtle signs of military-grade preparation hidden beneath the ranch's rustic exterior. His experience with explosives had taught him to recognize patterns, and everything about Evergreen Ranch followed a pattern he was only now beginning to understand. Jack Torres, completing another perimeter sweep, found himself increasingly disturbed by the terrain's tactical layout. His Special Forces training was finally breaking through years of civilian complacency, recognizing how every natural feature had been subtly enhanced to create interlocking fields of fire. The seemingly random placement of equipment and structures suddenly revealed itself as a carefully crafted tactical position. "Marcus," he called out, his voice tight with professional concern, "we need to talk." Derek Carson's agitation had reached a critical point. His rifle moved between potential threats with increasing speed, revealing the growing fear beneath his aggressive exterior. "The whole valley feels wrong," he muttered to his brother, "like we're being watched." His instincts weren't wrong. Concealed throughout the surrounding hills, members of the local hunting club maintained silent observation posts, each positioned according to Harrison's careful instructions over years of casual shooting lessons. Harrison allowed himself a moment of quiet pride in his community as he watched the Carson brothers' confidence continue to erode. The relationships he'd built weren't just cover. They were the foundation of a new kind of defensive network, one built on trust and mutual protection rather than violence and fear. Each person played their part, from Billy Waters learning the art of concealment to Martha Reynolds coordinating community response, all without drawing attention to their preparations. The morning sun cast shorter shadows now, approaching the position Harrison had designated as the optimal time for action. In the distance, the scheduled supply run from Preston's Crossing would be turning back, warned off by Martha's quiet network of communications. The weekly mail delivery would bypass the valley entirely, following contingency plans established through years of careful relationship building with local service providers. Sheriff Waters watched as his deputies took up their predetermined positions, each movement calculated to remain invisible to the gang's increasingly nervous surveillance. The law enforcement response Harrison had helped him design wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about careful coordination and precise application of pressure. Sometimes, Harrison had told him during one of their planning sessions, the most effective response is the one your opponent never sees coming. Dr. Chen monitored the increasing signs of stress in the Carson brothers' body language, applying the observational skills Harrison had taught her. The gang's professional facade was cracking, revealing the uncertainty beneath. They had expected to find an isolated rancher, vulnerable and alone. Instead, they had stumbled into the territory of a man who had spent years building not just defenses, but relationships, turning an entire community into an invisible support network. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and sage across Whispering Pines Valley as Harrison's plans continued to unfold. The Carson brothers had chosen their target, believing they were the predators in this scenario. They were about to learn that true strength wasn't found in violence and intimidation, but in the quiet bonds of community and the patient preparation of those who understood that the most effective defense was the one that remained invisible until the moment it was needed. The first significant shift in the morning's deadly chess game came when Boyd Miller discovered the hidden compartment behind Harrison's gun safe. The demolitions expert had been methodically working his way through the tack room's seemingly simple layout when his experienced hands detected an inconsistency in the wall paneling. His triumphant call brought Marcus Carson rushing into the barn, expecting to find their prize. Instead, what they discovered sent the first real chill of uncertainty through the gang's leadership. The compartment contained a meticulously maintained Barrett M82 sniper rifle, the weapon's sleek profile unmistakable to anyone with military experience. Jack Torres, examining the precision instrument with growing apprehension, recognized modifications that went far beyond civilian specifications. The custom scope mounting system, the reinforced bipod attachment, and the wear patterns on the grip all spoke of extensive combat use. Most telling was the small brass plate affixed to the stock, bearing the inscription USMC Scout Sniper, Operation Phantom Fury. Derek Carson's voice carried an edge of panic as he connected the pieces. Phantom Fury, that was Fallujah, second battle. His eyes darted to the window where Harrison could still be seen, calmly tending to his horses. The ghost scope operations were part of that. The younger Carson's hands tightened on his own rifle, his previous confidence evaporating as he realized the implications. They weren't dealing with a simple rancher, they were in the kill zone of one of the most legendary Marine snipers in modern combat history. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen watched through the monitoring system as the Carson brothers' carefully planned operation began to unravel. The discovery of Harrison's military background was only the first thread being pulled. Throughout the ranch, careful observation would reveal other signs. The precision-machined parts in the workshop that matched specialized shooting equipment. The reloading setup that spoke of someone who understood ballistics at an expert level. The topographical maps of the valley marked with precise distance calculations. Marcus Carson's face hardened as he examined the evidence before him. His prison-learned instincts were screaming warnings, but pride and the weight of his reputation prevented him from making the smart choice, immediate withdrawal. Instead, he began issuing orders with forced confidence, trying to regain control of a situation that had already slipped from his grasp. "Boyd, forget the safe. Wire the barn. Torres, get eyes on all approaches. We're dealing with a different class of target now." The Tucker twins, returning from their search of the house, brought more disturbing news. They had found a locked room in the basement, and their attempts to breach it had revealed steel-reinforced walls. More concerning were the fresh tire tracks they'd discovered behind the house, signs that someone had recently departed in haste, taking unknown variables with them. The young criminals' earlier bravado had been replaced by nervous energy as they realized they were operating blind in potentially hostile territory. Harrison, still maintaining his position by the corral, noted every detail of their increasing agitation, their body language, their positioning, their unconscious reactions to stress, all provided valuable intelligence to his combat-trained mind. He had seen similar behavior in Fallujah when insurgent groups realized too late that they had walked into a carefully prepared trap. The growing fear in their movements told him his strategy was working exactly as planned. Jack Torres, whose special forces background made him the most dangerous threat at this moment, had begun to implement proper defensive protocols. His military training was finally overriding the civilian complacency that had led them into this situation. Yet even these professional preparations played into Harrison's deeper strategy. Every defensive position the gang adopted had been anticipated and accounted for in his years of planning. Boyd Miller's expertise with explosives now became a liability rather than an asset. His growing understanding of the ranch's tactical layout made him increasingly hesitant to place charges, recognizing that any explosion might trigger prepared countermeasures. The demolished expert's reluctance to act decisively further heightened the tension among the gang members, creating fissures in their once confident unity. Young Billy Waters, maintaining his concealed position, watched the gang's deteriorating cohesion through his scope. Harrison's training had taught him to read these signs, the increasing space between team members, the unconscious positioning that prepared for individual rather than coordinated action, the subtle tells that indicated trust breaking down under pressure. Each observation confirmed that the trap was closing exactly as his mentor had designed it. Sheriff Waters, coordinating with his deputies through silent hand signals, recognized the patterns from his military days. The Carson Brothers gang was displaying classic signs of a unit beginning to fragment under psychological pressure. Their earlier confidence had been based on believing they held all the advantages. Now, faced with evidence that they had severely underestimated their target, the confidence was crumbling. The autumn sun had reached its zenith, casting minimal shadows across the valley. Harrison knew this was the most dangerous moment, When desperate men might take reckless action to regain control of a situation they could feel slipping away. His years of combat experience had taught him that the most critical phase of any operation was when the target realized they were trapped, but hadn't yet accepted defeat. What followed would demonstrate why some of the most effective combat operations in history were won through psychological dominance rather than direct confrontation. The discovery of Harrison's true identity triggered a cascade of memories for Jack Torres. The former Special Forces operator had heard whispers about ghost scope during his own deployments, tales of impossible shots taken during the bloodiest days of Fallujah. Standing in Harrison's barn, examining the evidence of that legend's presence, Torres felt the weight of his miscalculation. He had led his team into the operating zone of a man whose skills had become military legend, whose techniques were still taught in advanced sniper courses. Marcus Carson paced the barn's interior, his prison-hardened instincts warring with his pride. The scattered tools and equipment around him, which hours earlier had seemed like simple ranch implements, now revealed their dual purpose to his increasingly paranoid observation. Every item had been positioned to provide cover or channel movement. Even the barn's support beams seemed to mock him, their placement creating natural firing lanes that could turn the structure into a killing zone with minimal effort. Derek Carson's earlier bravado had transformed into barely controlled panic. His hands moved constantly over his rifle, checking and rechecking components with obsessive intensity. The weapon, which had previously given him such confidence, now seemed inadequate compared to the precision instruments they had discovered in Harrison's hidden armory. Each piece of equipment they found told the story of a man who had elevated shooting beyond skill into artistry. Boyd Miller worked with increasing frustration at his explosive charges, acutely aware that his usual methods might be exactly what Harrison expected. The demolitions expert had learned his trade through practical experience, but he was now facing someone who understood the science of combat at its highest level. Every placement felt like a potential trap. Every decision weighted with the possibility of playing into their opponent's hands. Outside, Harrison maintained his position by the corral, his movements still displaying the calm precision that had made him legendary among military snipers. Years of combat experience had taught him that psychological pressure often accomplished what direct confrontation could not. He could read the increasing stress in his opponent's body language, seeing the same signs he had observed in targets during his military operations. Dr. Chen, monitoring the situation from the reinforced cellar, recognized the patterns Harrison had taught her to identify. The Carson Brothers gang was displaying the classic signs of unit breakdown under pressure. Their movements had become uncoordinated, their positioning sloppy. Even their communication showed signs of strain, with increasingly sharp exchanges between team members betraying their eroding confidence. Young Billy Waters maintained his concealed position with a discipline that would have made his mentor proud. Through his scope, he observed details that spoke volumes about the gang's deteriorating cohesion. The Tucker twins had unconsciously separated, each seeking individual cover rather than maintaining their usual coordinated positioning. Their matched Glocks, previously handled with theatrical flourish, now seemed to weigh heavily in their inexperienced hands. Sheriff Waters, coordinating his deputies' positions through silent signals, saw the situation through experienced eyes. Harrison's psychological operation was textbook perfect, allowing the targets to discover information in a controlled manner, letting their own imaginations amplify their fears. Each revelation about Harrison's background served to further unbalance the gang's tactical thinking. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine and sage across the valley as Harrison's plans continued to unfold. In the distance, a hawk's cry echoed off the surrounding hills, the sound making the Tucker twins jump visibly. Their nerves had been stretched to the breaking point by the growing realization that they were facing an opponent far beyond their experience. Marcus Carson's voice carried forced authority as he tried to regain control of his fracturing team. "He's just one man," he declared, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "We still have the numbers." What Carson failed to understand was that numbers meant little when facing someone who had made a career of evening impossible odds through preparation and skill. Jack Torres knew better. His special forces training helped him recognize the full implications of their situation. Every aspect of the ranch's layout, every carefully positioned item, spoke of years of tactical preparation. They weren't just facing one man, they were dealing with an environment that had been meticulously crafted into a weapon by someone who understood warfare at its highest level. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen accessed Harrison's secure communication system, coordinating with the broader support network they had established. The community's response was silent but effective, each member playing their role in the larger strategy. Martha Reynolds' feed store had become a coordination center, quietly directing traffic away from the valley while maintaining normal appearances. Harrison's patience, honed through countless hours in combat observation posts, allowed him to read the subtle signs of his opponent's growing distress. The Carson brothers had begun the morning believing they were the predators, but each passing hour revealed more evidence that they had walked into the territory of a far more dangerous hunter. Their earlier confidence had been based on facing simple ranchers and townspeople. Now they found themselves trapped in a tactical situation that would have challenged the most elite military units. The sun continued its arc across the Montana sky, its light revealing new details of Harrison's preparations with each passing hour. The Carson Brothers gang had stepped into a confrontation that would demonstrate why some of the most effective combat operators in history weren't the ones who sought violence, but the ones who understood how to control every aspect of the battlefield before the first shot was fired. The breaking point began with a sound that cut through the mounting tension, the distant report of a rifle shot echoing across the valley. Marcus Carson's head snapped toward the noise, his prison-honed instincts recognizing that the shot hadn't come from any of his men. The sound triggered an immediate response from Jack Torres, whose special forces training told him exactly what they were hearing. A precision rifle being tested at extreme range, the echo pattern suggesting a distance of well over 1,000 yards. Harrison remained motionless by the corral, but his mind processed every detail of his opponent's reactions. The single shot had been carefully planned, executed by Sheriff Waters from a predetermined position. It served multiple purposes: measuring wind conditions, testing the gang's response patterns, and most importantly, planting seeds of uncertainty about exactly how many shooters they might be facing. In the barn, Boyd Miller's movements became increasingly erratic as he tried to position his explosive charges. The demolitions expert had discovered that key structural points, which would normally be ideal for placing his devices, had been subtly reinforced in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of blast patterns and structural weakness. Every attempt to gain tactical advantage revealed another layer of Harrison's preparations. Dr. Chen watched through the monitoring system as the psychological pressure began to show clear effects. The Tucker twins had unconsciously drawn closer together, their earlier bravado replaced by visible nervousness. Their matching Glocks, which had seemed so threatening hours earlier, now appeared almost childish compared to the professional military equipment they had discovered throughout the ranch. Derek Carson's composure continued to deteriorate as he attempted to establish a defensive position. His experience with long-range shooting, which had previously been a source of pride, now worked against him. He understood just enough about precision marksmanship to recognize the tactical disadvantages of their position. Every window, every gap in the barn's structure, every open space suddenly seemed to offer potential firing lanes for a shooter of Harrison's caliber. Jack Torres found himself engaged in a mental chess game he hadn't expected. His Special Forces background helped him recognize the sophisticated nature of Harrison's preparation, but this knowledge only heightened his concern. The ranch's layout, which had initially appeared random, now revealed itself as a masterwork of tactical design. Each building, each piece of equipment, each natural feature had been positioned to create overlapping fields of fire while offering minimal effective cover to potential threats. The autumn wind shifted subtly, carrying with it the promise of approaching weather. Harrison noted the change automatically, his mind calculating the adjustments needed for long-range shooting in changing conditions. Years of combat experience had taught him that environmental factors often proved more decisive than individual skill. The approaching storm front would add another layer of complexity to the tactical situation. Marcus Carson's attempts to maintain control became increasingly desperate. "Spread out. Maintain visual contact," he ordered, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty that his men couldn't miss. The gang leader was beginning to understand that they weren't just facing a skilled opponent. They were caught in an elaborately prepared tactical situation that had been years in the making. Billy Waters, still maintaining his concealed position, observed the growing chaos through his scope. Harrison's training had taught him to read these signs, the increasing frequency of nervous weapon checks, the unconscious clustering of team members seeking reassurance, the subtle signs of command structure breaking down under pressure. Each observation confirmed that the psychological operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The distant sound of thunder rolled across the valley, adding nature's voice to the mounting tension. Boyd Miller's expertise with explosives had become a source of anxiety rather than confidence. Each attempt to rig charges revealed new complications, new evidence of countermeasures he hadn't anticipated. The demolitions expert was beginning to understand that his usual methods might be exactly what Harrison had prepared for. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen coordinated with the broader support network through Harrison's secure communication system. Martha Reynolds reported that the last civilians had been quietly evacuated from potential danger areas, while Sheriff Waters confirmed his deputies were in position to contain any attempted escape routes. The community's response demonstrated the effectiveness of years of careful preparation and relationship building. The sun disappeared behind gathering storm clouds, casting the valley into premature twilight. The changing light conditions added another layer of psychological pressure to the Carson brothers' increasingly fragile tactical position. What had begun as a seemingly simple raid had transformed into a sophisticated tactical engagement against an opponent whose preparation and skill far exceeded their experience. Harrison's patience, honed through countless hours in combat observation posts, allowed him to read the mounting signs of stress in his opponent's body language. The Carson brothers had initiated this confrontation believing they were the apex predators in this scenario. Each passing hour revealed more evidence that they had stumbled into a tactical situation that would have challenged the most elite military units in the world. The approaching storm front promised to add nature's fury to the already volatile situation. In the distance, another single shot rang out, its echo distorted by the gathering clouds. The sound served as a reminder that they were operating in an environment completely controlled by their opponent, facing a man whose military career had been built on turning patience and preparation into lethal efficiency. The crisis erupted when one of the Tucker twins made a fatal error in judgment. Unnerved by the mounting pressure and distant rifle shots, the young criminal attempted to establish a superior tactical position by climbing to the barn's hayloft. The wooden ladder creaked under his weight, the sound echoing through the tension-filled air. In that moment, Harrison's voice carried across the yard for the first time since the confrontation began. "The hayloft's a kill box," he stated matter-of-factly, his tone carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty. "Every window up there has been pre-sighted from multiple positions. The range cards are still in my desk drawer if you'd like to verify the calculations." The clinical precision of his words had more impact than any threat could have achieved. The Tucker twin froze on the ladder, suddenly aware of his exposure from at least 3 different angles he could identify. Marcus Carson recognized the voice of experience when he heard it. The calm delivery, the casual reference to range calculations, the implicit demonstration of tactical control, everything confirmed what the discovery of Harrison's military credentials had suggested. They weren't dealing with a lucky shot or a weekend warrior. This was someone who had turned precision shooting into an art form, who had spent years preparing this battleground while they remained ignorant of its true nature. Derek Carson's composure finally shattered. "He's playing with us," he shouted, his voice carrying an edge of hysteria. "Like he played with targets in Fallujah." The younger Carson brought his rifle up, aiming at Harrison's position by the corral. Before he could complete the motion, another single shot rang out from the distant hills. The bullet struck the ground precisely 3 feet in front of Derek's position, sending fragments of gravel spraying against the barn wall. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen watched through the monitoring system as Harrison's carefully orchestrated pressure began to show results. The Carson Brothers crew was displaying textbook signs of tactical breakdown: fragmented communication, deteriorating fire discipline, loss of coordinated movement. Each symptom confirmed that the psychological operation was achieving its intended effect. Jack Torres, whose Special Forces background had initially made him the most dangerous member of the crew, now became a liability to his team. His training allowed him to recognize the full implications of their situation, to understand just how completely they had been outmaneuvered. "This whole valley's a prepared position," he announced, his professional assessment cutting through the remaining bravado. "Every angle, every approach, every fallback position, he's had years to get it perfect." Boyd Miller's expertise with explosives became another source of mounting pressure. His careful examination of the barn's structure had revealed subtle modifications that spoke of intimate knowledge of blast dynamics. "The charges won't work," he reported, his voice tight with professional frustration. "Every critical point's been reinforced. Setting them off might just make things worse." The demolitions expert's admission confirmed what Harrison's earlier words had implied. They were operating in an environment that had been systematically hardened against their usual tactics. The gathering storm added nature's fury to the psychological pressure. Wind gusts carried the scent of approaching rain, changing the ballistic calculations for any potential shooting. Harrison remained motionless by the corral, but his mind processed every environmental shift, every tactical adjustment required by the changing conditions. His years of combat experience had taught him that weather often proved as decisive as skill in determining battlefield outcomes. Young Billy Waters, maintaining his concealed position, observed the deteriorating situation through his scope. The Tucker twins had completely abandoned their earlier swagger, their matched Glocks now held with visible tremors. Their youth and inexperience, which had made them eager participants in previous raids, now rendered them the weakest links in an already fragile tactical chain. Marcus Carson made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. "We still have numbers," he declared, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "One man can't watch every angle." Harrison's response came in the form of 3 simultaneous shots from different positions around the valley, each round striking within inches of predetermined warning points. The demonstration effectively shattered Carson's last attempt at maintaining tactical cohesion. Sheriff Waters, coordinating with his deputies through silent signals, recognized the approaching climax. Harrison's strategy had systematically dismantled the gang's confidence, using their own expertise against them. The demolitions expert couldn't trust his explosives, the marksman couldn't trust his shooting positions, and the tactical specialist couldn't find any angle that hadn't been accounted for in the ranch's defensive preparation. The storm's first lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the valley in stark relief. In that brilliant moment, the full scope of their predicament became clear to every member of the Carson Brothers crew. They had walked into a prepared kill zone crafted by someone who had spent years perfecting every aspect of its design. Their usual advantages, numbers, firepower, and tactical experience, had been systematically neutralized by a level of preparation they hadn't believed possible. Harrison's voice carried across the yard again. Every word weighted with the authority of someone who had mastered the darkest arts of combat. "In Fallujah," he stated quietly, "I learned that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who shoots first. It's the one who can afford to wait." The implicit threat in his words was clear. They were facing someone who had turned patience into a weapon more lethal than any rifle. The decisive moment came with the storm's first heavy raindrops striking the dusty ground. Marcus Carson, watching the water darken the earth around his position, suddenly understood the full implications of their situation. The rain wasn't just a natural occurrence. It was the final element of Harrison's carefully orchestrated plan. The moisture would affect visibility, change ballistic calculations, and most crucially, reveal the true nature of their tactical position. As the rain intensified, previously invisible lines began to emerge in the soil around the barn. The water traced patterns that only someone with military engineering experience would recognize, carefully graded drainage channels that served a dual purpose. While they appeared to be simple water management for the ranch, these subtle ground modifications actually created predetermined firing lanes, each one calculated to funnel movement into specific areas. Harrison's voice carried through the strengthening storm, its quiet certainty more commanding than any shout could have been. "In 3 minutes, the drainage system will channel water through the north side of the barn. Any explosives Mr. Miller placed in the lower sections will be compromised." The clinical precision of his assessment struck Boyd Miller like a physical blow. The demolitions expert realized that even the ranch's water management had been designed as a defensive measure. Jack Torres, his special forces training, allowing him to recognize the sophistication of what they faced, made a professional decision. "We're done, Marcus," he stated flatly, allowing his rifle to point toward the ground. "This isn't a tactical situation anymore. It's a demonstration." The former operator had finally grasped what they were experiencing, a masterclass in defensive warfare, orchestrated by someone who had turned combat preparation into an art form. In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen monitored the unfolding situation through Harrison's surveillance system. The ranch's cameras, disguised as ordinary security measures, revealed the full scope of the gang's deteriorating position. The Tucker twins had completely abandoned any pretense of tactical positioning, their young faces showing the strain of realizing they were hopelessly outmatched. Derek Carson's hands shook visibly on his rifle, his earlier confidence shattered by the understanding that his marksmanship skills were meaningless against this level of preparation. The storm's intensity increased, and with it came another revelation. The rain activated solar-powered ground lights, seemingly ordinary ranch safety measures, which suddenly illuminated every major approach to the barn. This lighting system, which appeared to be a simple safety feature, actually served to eliminate any advantage of darkness while creating harsh shadows that would make accurate shooting nearly impossible for anyone not intimately familiar with the terrain. Sheriff Waters, observing through his scope from a distant position, recognized the psychological mastery of Harrison's approach. Instead of confronting the gang directly, he had orchestrated a situation that used their own expertise against them. The demolitions expert couldn't trust his explosives, the marksman couldn't rely on his shooting positions, and the tactical specialist couldn't find any angle that hadn't been accounted for years in advance. Young Billy Waters maintained his concealed position, the rain having no effect on his shelter, another piece of evidence showing how thoroughly Harrison had prepared every aspect of his defensive position. Through his scope, Billy observed the final breakdown of the Carson Brothers crew's cohesion. The professional criminals who had arrived so confidently that morning now stood exposed, their tactical advantages systematically stripped away by an opponent who had spent years preparing for this moment. Marcus Carson made one final attempt to assert control over the deteriorating situation. "Whatever you're planning," he called out to Harrison, his voice struggling to project authority through the rain, "you can't watch all of us at once." The response came not in words, but in action. Simultaneously, 5 red laser dots appeared on different members of the gang, each one holding rock steady despite the weather. The message was clear. Harrison wasn't working alone, and every member of the crew was under precise observation. The revelation of the laser sights, a deliberately theatrical touch that Harrison had carefully planned, served as the final breaking point. The Tucker twins dropped their weapons almost simultaneously, their matched Glocks falling into the muddy ground with dull thuds. Boyd Miller stepped away from his partially placed charges, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender that spoke louder than words. Derek Carson's rifle lowered incrementally, its barrel pointing toward the ground as the last of his confidence drained away. Through it all, Harrison had hardly moved from his position by the corral. His stillness, maintained despite the strengthening storm, demonstrated the patience that had made him legendary in combat. That same patience had allowed him to spend years preparing this ground, to wait calmly as overconfident opponents walked into a trap of their own making, and now to watch as their resistance crumbled without him having to fire a single shot. The rain continued to fall, but its rhythm now seemed to carry a different meaning. What had started as a tactical operation by a confident criminal crew had transformed into a masterclass in defensive warfare. The Carson brothers and their team had arrived believing themselves to be skilled predators, only to discover they had wandered into the territory of someone who had mastered far darker arts of combat during his military service. Their mistake would serve as a lesson that would be whispered about in criminal circles for years to come, a reminder that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who appear most harmless until it's too late. The surrender of the Carson Brothers crew unfolded with the same precise orchestration that had characterized every aspect of Harrison's strategy. Through the strengthening storm, his voice carried instructions that left no room for misinterpretation. "Mr. Torres," he addressed the former Special Forces operator directly, "you understand tactical procedure. Have your people remove tactical vests and weapon belts. Place them in the center of the yard, then move to the south wall of the barn." Jack Torres recognized the professional courtesy in Harrison's words, the acknowledgement of his military background. More importantly, he understood that the instructions weren't just about disarmament. They were positioning the crew exactly where Harrison wanted them, in a location he had undoubtedly prepared for just such a situation. "Do what he says," Torres ordered, his voice carrying the weight of someone who knew when a tactical situation was completely lost. Dr. Chen watched through the monitoring system as the gang members complied. The Tucker twins moved first, their earlier bravado replaced by an almost robotic compliance. Boyd Miller followed, the demolitions expert's movements showing the careful precision of someone who understood the lethal consequences of any sudden actions. Derek Carson hesitated until another laser sight appeared on his chest, the unwavering red dot providing all the persuasion necessary. Sheriff Waters coordinated with his deputies through silent hand signals, their positions remaining concealed but ready. The law enforcement response had been part of Harrison's preparation from the beginning, integrated into his defensive strategy with the same thoroughness he had applied to every other aspect. Each deputy knew their role, understood the importance of maintaining pressure without escalating the situation. Marcus Carson, watching his crews surrender, finally grasped the full magnitude of their failure. They had walked into an operation prepared by someone who had made a career of orchestrating precisely this kind of tactical superiority. Every move they had made, every decision they had taken, had been anticipated and counted years in advance. The rain continued to fall, emphasizing their exposure while revealing more evidence of Harrison's preparation. Harrison's voice cut through the storm again, addressing Boyd Miller. "The charges you placed, there's one against the north support beam that concerns me." The specificity of his knowledge made the demolitions expert freeze. "The rain will reach it in approximately 2 minutes. Would you prefer to disarm it yourself, or should I have someone else handle it?" The professional courtesy in the question carried an implicit threat. Harrison knew exactly where every explosive had been placed and had planned for their removal. Billy Waters maintained his position, observing through his scope as Miller carefully approached his partially set charges. The young man had learned more about tactical operations in the past few hours than in all his previous training. Harrison's orchestration of events demonstrated how superior preparation and patience could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. The storm's intensity seemed to match the moment's gravity as Marcus Carson finally stepped forward to surrender. The gang leader's prison-hardened exterior had cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Harrison's voice acknowledged him with the same professional detachment he had shown throughout the confrontation. "Your reputation in 3 state prisons suggested you were smarter than this, Mr. Carson. The tactical sophistication of your previous operations deserved better than such an obvious trap." In the reinforced cellar, Dr. Chen began implementing the next phase of Harrison's plan. The medical supplies she had carefully stockpiled weren't just for show. Harrison had insisted on being prepared to treat any injuries that might occur during a confrontation. It was another demonstration of his thoroughness, planning not just for combat, but for its aftermath. The laser sights remained steady on their targets as Sheriff Waters' deputies began moving into visible positions. The law enforcement response had been coordinated weeks in advance, integrated into Harrison's defensive strategy with the same precision he had applied to every other aspect. Each officer knew their role, understood the importance of maintaining pressure while allowing Harrison to control the situation's resolution. Harrison's voice carried new instructions through the rain. "Mr. Torres, have your people sit with their backs against the barn wall, ankles crossed, hands on their knees." The positioning wasn't arbitrary. It was designed to maintain control while providing clear fields of fire if anyone attempted resistance. "Sheriff Waters' deputies will approach from the east. Any movement before they arrive will be considered hostile." The storm continued to intensify, but its tactical impact had been nullified by Harrison's preparation. The drainage systems he had installed channeled water away from critical areas, maintaining clear lines of sight despite the weather. Even nature itself seemed to bend to the will of someone who had spent years preparing for every contingency. As law enforcement began their final approach, Harrison maintained his position by the corral, his stillness a reminder of the patience that had allowed him to orchestrate this entire operation. The Carson Brothers' crew had arrived that morning believing themselves to be skilled predators, only to discover they had walked into the territory of someone who had mastered warfare at its highest level. Their surrender wasn't just a tactical victory. It was a demonstration of how thoroughly superior preparation could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. The aftermath of the confrontation revealed the true sophistication of Harrison's preparation. As Sheriff Waters' deputies secured the Carson brothers and their crew, evidence of the rancher's tactical mastery became increasingly apparent. The rain had exposed hidden defensive positions throughout the property, each one carefully designed to appear as natural features of the landscape. What seemed like ordinary drainage ditches showed themselves to be carefully crafted firing positions, offering perfect angles while providing complete cover. Dr. Chen emerged from the reinforced cellar to find Harrison maintaining his characteristic calm as he supervised the securing of Boyd Miller's explosive devices. The veterinarian's medical expertise proved unnecessary. Harrison's strategy had achieved its objective without a single shot being fired. The precision of his psychological operation had accomplished what violence could not, breaking the will of experienced criminals without risking unnecessary casualties. Marcus Carson, now in custody, watched with a prison veteran's understanding as Harrison's true capabilities became clear. The ranch's defenses, which had seemed almost mythical during the confrontation, proved to be even more sophisticated than they had imagined. Every aspect of the property had been modified for defensive purposes, yet none of these modifications were obvious until you knew exactly what to look for. The gang leader realized they hadn't just been outgunned, they had been completely outthought from the moment they chose this target. Jack Torres, his special forces background allowing him to appreciate the tactical brilliance he had witnessed, found himself providing a professional assessment to the deputies processing his arrest. "In all my military experience," he stated, his voice carrying genuine admiration, "I never saw anything this comprehensive. He didn't just prepare the ground, he turned the entire valley into a tactical operation that could be run by one person." The former operator understood that they had witnessed something that would be studied in military circles for years to come. Young Billy Waters emerged from his concealed position, the training Harrison had provided proving its worth. The ranch hand's ability to maintain discipline throughout the confrontation demonstrated how thoroughly Harrison had prepared not just his property, but also the people he trusted. Sheriff Waters greeted his grandson with evident pride, understanding that the young man had played a crucial role in an operation that would become legendary in law enforcement circles. The Tucker twins, their youthful bravado completely shattered, sat in the back of a deputy's vehicle. Their matching Glocks had been secured as evidence, but the real prize was their newfound understanding of true professional capability. They had arrived believing themselves dangerous because they could handle firearms. They departed knowing that true mastery went far beyond simple shooting skills. Boyd Miller's expertise with explosives had given him a unique perspective on Harrison's preparations. As deputies carefully documented and disabled his partially placed charges, the demolitions expert found himself explaining to law enforcement how thoroughly he had been countered. "Every place I considered for a charge," he detailed, had been subtly reinforced or modified to channel the blast effect away from critical structures. It wasn't just about stopping us, it was about controlling exactly how we would fail. Dr. Chen's role in the operation revealed itself to be more crucial than even the deputies had initially realized. Her regular visits to the ranch had provided perfect cover for establishing and maintaining the sophisticated communication network that had helped coordinate the community's response. The veterinary supplies in the reinforced cellar included not just medical equipment, but also spare parts for the surveillance and communication systems that had proven so crucial to the operation's success. Harrison finally moved from his position by the corral, his movements showing no sign of the tension that had underlined the morning's events. His interaction with law enforcement demonstrated the same precise professionalism that had characterized his handling of the confrontation. Each piece of evidence was documented with military precision, each aspect of his defensive preparations explained in detail that would prove invaluable for future law enforcement training. The storm began to clear, sunlight breaking through the clouds to illuminate the scene. Sheriff Waters coordinated with state authorities, knowing that the day's events would have implications far beyond their small valley. The Carson Brothers' crew had built their reputation on careful planning and professional execution, yet they had been systematically dismantled by someone who understood planning and execution on a completely different level. Martha Reynolds arrived with other community members who had played supporting roles in Harrison's defensive network. Their presence revealed another layer of his preparation, the careful cultivation of relationships that had turned an entire community into an integrated defense system. Each person had known their role, understood their part in the larger strategy, yet none had ever drawn attention to their preparations. As the day drew to a close, the full impact of what had occurred began to register with everyone involved. The Carson Brothers' crew had arrived, believing themselves to be sophisticated criminals executing a well-planned operation. Instead, they had become unwitting participants in a demonstration of tactical mastery that would be discussed in professional circles for years to come. Their mistake had not just led to their capture, it had provided a masterclass in how thorough preparation and tactical patience could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower. In the days following the Carson brothers' arrest, the true significance of what had transpired at Evergreen Ranch began to emerge. State law enforcement officials, reviewing the incident reports, recognized that they had witnessed something unprecedented in civilian defensive operations. Harrison's integration of military tactical principles into a ranch's defensive architecture represented an evolution in protective strategy that warranted serious study. Jack Torres, providing his statement to federal authorities, offered insights that only his Special Forces background could appreciate. What makes this operation remarkable isn't just the physical preparation, he explained from his holding cell. It's the psychological architecture. Harrison didn't just prepare firing positions and defensive measures. He prepared an entire scenario that would lead experienced operators to defeat themselves. The former tactical specialist understood that they had participated in what would become a textbook example of defensive strategy. Sheriff Waters found himself fielding calls from law enforcement agencies across the country, all seeking to understand how a single rancher had systematically dismantled a criminal operation that had frustrated multiple state task forces. The answer, he explained, lay not in the sophisticated hardware or tactical positions, but in Harrison's fundamental understanding of human nature. He didn't just predict what they would do, the sheriff detailed in his official report. He created an environment that would make them do exactly what he wanted them to do. Dr. Chen's role revealed deeper layers of strategic sophistication. Her veterinary practice had provided perfect cover for establishing a community-wide defensive network, but it had served another purpose. Her regular visits to surrounding ranches had allowed Harrison to build relationships throughout the valley, creating a web of support that remained invisible until it was needed. This social architecture proved as crucial to his success as any physical preparation. The Tucker twins, during their separate interrogations, demonstrated how completely Harrison's strategy had transformed their understanding of professional capability. "We thought we were dangerous because we could shoot," the younger twin admitted. "But real danger isn't about shooting at all. It's about controlling every aspect of a situation so completely that shooting becomes unnecessary." This insight, coming from someone who had previously glorified violence, demonstrated the educational impact of Harrison's approach. Boyd Miller's technical analysis of the ranch's defensive preparations became a subject of study for law enforcement training programs. The demolitions expert's detailed explanation of how Harrison had anticipated and countered every standard breaching technique revealed layers of preparation that went beyond simple physical hardening. He didn't just protect against explosives, Miller explained. He created a situation where attempting to use them would actually make our position worse. Marcus Carson, speaking to federal investigators, provided perhaps the most telling assessment. In prison, you learn to read people, to spot weakness, the gang leader reflected. We thought we saw weakness in a quiet rancher who seemed more interested in horses than security. What we actually saw was someone so confident in their preparation that they didn't need to display strength. This insight, from a man who had built his reputation on identifying and exploiting weakness, demonstrated how thoroughly Harrison had subverted criminal operational assumptions. The community's response to the incident revealed another dimension of Harrison's strategic depth. Martha Reynolds coordinated with law enforcement to explain how the valley's civilian population had been integrated into the defensive strategy without ever compromising operational security. Regular social events, community projects, and casual conversations had created a network of informed participants who knew exactly what to do in a crisis without ever drawing attention to their preparation. Harrison's interaction with federal tactical analysts demonstrated the professional depth behind his apparent simplicity. His explanation of how each defensive measure had been designed to appear as a natural part of ranch operations provided insights into a level of tactical thinking that went beyond military doctrine. The best defensive position, he explained, is one that doesn't look defensive at all until it's too late to matter. Young Billy Waters found himself providing demonstrations to law enforcement trainees, showing how Harrison's lessons in movement and observation had allowed him to maintain crucial surveillance positions throughout the confrontation. The ranch hand's ability to integrate completely into the background while maintaining tactical awareness demonstrated principles that went beyond standard military or law enforcement training. The technical analysis of Harrison's communication systems revealed another layer of sophistication. What appeared to be standard ranch equipment concealed a network of surveillance and coordination capabilities that matched military-grade tactical operations centers. Yet every component had been carefully selected and positioned to maintain the appearance of ordinary agricultural infrastructure. As law enforcement completed their documentation of the incident, a new understanding emerged about the nature of effective defense. Harrison had demonstrated that true security didn't come from obvious displays of force or sophisticated equipment, but from the patient development of integrated systems that remained invisible until needed. His success in neutralizing a sophisticated criminal operation without firing a shot provided a model for defensive operations that would influence professional thinking for years to come. 6 months after the Carson Brothers' attempted raid on Evergreen Ranch, the impact of that rain-soaked morning continued to resonate through professional circles across the country. Thomas Harrison's defense of his property had evolved from a local incident into a case study examined by military strategists, law enforcement trainers, and security specialists. The quiet rancher, who had once been known as Ghost Scope, had provided a masterclass in defensive operations that challenged conventional wisdom about tactical response. The federal task force investigating the Carson Brothers' criminal enterprise discovered that Harrison's influence extended far beyond that single confrontation. Analysis of the gang's previous operations revealed a pattern of sophisticated tactical planning that had made them nearly unstoppable, until they encountered someone who understood planning at a fundamentally deeper level. The contrast between their approach and Harrison's preparation became required reading at the FBI Academy's Tactical Training Division. Dr. Sarah Chen found her veterinary practice transformed by the incident's aftermath. While she continued her regular rounds, Her expertise in integrating medical preparation into defensive planning brought invitations to consult with emergency response teams nationwide. The protocols she and Harrison had developed for maintaining operational security while building community support networks proved invaluable for rural law enforcement agencies facing similar challenges. Sheriff James Waters implemented training programs based on Harrison's defensive principles, focusing not on firepower or equipment, but on patient preparation and psychological understanding. The most important lesson, he explained to a conference of law enforcement leaders, isn't about tactical positions or equipment. It's about creating an environment where superior position and preparation make violence unnecessary. His grandson Billy's first-hand experience became an integral part of the training, demonstrating how young deputies could learn to observe and report without compromising their cover. Jack Torres, serving his sentence in federal custody, found himself regularly consulted by tactical instructors seeking to understand the psychological impact of Harrison's strategy. The former Special Forces operators' analysis of how thoroughly they had been outmaneuvered provided insights that no outside observer could have offered. "We thought we were executing a sophisticated tactical operation," he wrote in a training document. "In reality, we were participating in a demonstration of how completely superior preparation can negate any tactical advantage." The Tucker twins' transformation from arrogant young gunmen to thoughtful students of tactical reality became a story shared in juvenile intervention programs. Their testimony about how Harrison's precise control of the situation had shattered their illusions about power, and violence resonated with young people at risk of following similar paths. "We learned that true strength isn't about having the biggest guns or being the toughest," the younger twin explained to a youth group. "It's about being so well prepared that you don't need to prove anything." Boyd Miller's technical analysis of Harrison's defensive architecture continued to influence security planning across multiple industries. The demolitions expert's detailed explanation of how thoroughly his expertise had been neutralized provided invaluable insights for facility protection. Corporate security directors studied how Harrison had transformed ordinary ranch infrastructure into an integrated defensive system without ever compromising its civilian appearance. Martha Reynolds' role in coordinating community support became a model for rural defense planning. Her demonstration of how normal social networks could be transformed into effective security systems without militarizing civilian life attracted attention from community leaders nationwide. The protocols she and Harrison had developed for maintaining operational security while building community trust proved adaptable to various environments facing similar challenges. Harrison himself remained characteristically modest about his achievement, but he understood the importance of sharing the knowledge he had accumulated. His careful documentation of how military tactical principles could be adapted to civilian defensive operations provided invaluable resources for those seeking to protect vulnerable communities. "The goal isn't to create fortresses," he explained to a group of security planners. "It's to develop environments where protection grows naturally from normal daily operations." Evergreen Ranch itself evolved into an unofficial training center, though it never lost its primary identity as a working horse ranch. Law enforcement agencies and security specialists visited to study how Harrison had integrated defensive measures into ordinary agricultural infrastructure. Each feature of the property demonstrated how tactical advantage could be achieved without sacrificing functional efficiency or drawing unwanted attention. The broader implications of Harrison's success continued to influence professional thinking about defensive operations. His demonstration that superior preparation and psychological understanding could overcome any advantage of numbers or firepower challenged traditional assumptions about tactical response. The incident proved that the most effective defense wasn't about overwhelming force or sophisticated equipment, but about patient preparation and profound understanding of human nature. As time passed, the legend of the quiet rancher who had systematically dismantled a notorious criminal gang without firing a shot grew in professional circles. But the true legacy of that confrontation wasn't found in the dramatic details of what happened, but in the deeper understanding it provided about the nature of effective defense. Harrison had shown that true security grew not from the ability to dominate through force, but from the patient development of systems that made force unnecessary. 1 year after the Carson Brothers incident, Thomas Harrison's defensive strategies began attracting attention from the highest levels of national security. The Department of Homeland Security's Rural Protection Division launched a comprehensive study of how a single rancher had created a defensive system so sophisticated it could neutralize experienced criminals without relying on overwhelming force or advanced technology. Senior military analysts from the Pentagon's Tactical Assessment Division arrived at Evergreen Ranch to examine how Harrison had adapted military principles to civilian application. What impressed them most wasn't the sophisticated integration of defensive measures, but how thoroughly these measures had been concealed within normal ranch operations. Colonel James Mitchell, leading the assessment team, noted in his official report that Harrison had achieved something unprecedented, a civilian facility with military-grade security that remained completely undetectable to casual observation. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit found particular value in studying how Harrison had engineered the psychological aspects of his defense. Dr. Elizabeth Winters, the unit's lead analyst, spent 3 weeks documenting how each element of the ranch's design had been carefully crafted to influence adversary behavior. "What we're seeing here," she explained in her findings, "is psychological warfare elevated to an art form. Every aspect of the property was designed not just to defend against threats, but to guide potential adversaries into making predictable decisions." Harrison's integration of community support networks attracted attention from the Department of Defense's Civil Affairs Division. They recognized that his approach to building civilian cooperation without compromising operational security could have significant applications in conflict zones worldwide. The protocols he had developed for maintaining effective communication while preserving normal community life became required reading for civil affairs officers preparing for overseas deployment. Dr. Chen found herself consulting with the Centers for Disease Control's Emergency Response Division, helping them understand how medical preparation could be integrated into broader security frameworks without drawing attention. The systems she and Harrison had developed for disguising medical supplies and equipment as ordinary veterinary resources proved valuable for agencies planning for crisis response in vulnerable areas. The National Security Agency's Infrastructure Protection Department conducted a detailed analysis of how Harrison had created secure communication networks using seemingly ordinary ranch equipment. Their findings led to new guidelines for protecting critical infrastructure in rural areas. The ability to maintain sophisticated surveillance and coordination capabilities while preserving an ordinary agricultural appearance became a model for facilities requiring discrete security measures. Sheriff Waters received funding from the Department of Justice to develop training programs based on Harrison's approach. The emphasis on patient preparation and psychological understanding over equipment and firepower represented a significant shift in law enforcement thinking about rural security. What Harrison demonstrated, Waters explained to a congressional committee on rural law enforcement, was that effective security doesn't require militarizing civilian spaces. It requires understanding how to make existing civilian infrastructure work defensively. The academic community also took notice. The Naval Postgraduate School's Department of Defense Analysis began incorporating case studies of the Carson Brothers incident into their curriculum. Professor Robert Chen, head of Asymmetric Warfare Studies, noted that Harrison's success challenged conventional wisdom about force requirements for effective defense. This case demonstrates that superior preparation and psychological understanding can completely negate traditional advantages of force size and equipment. Harrison's documentation of his defensive principles became required reading at advanced military training facilities. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School incorporated his insights about integrating defensive positions into civilian infrastructure into their advanced coursework. The Army's Special Forces Qualification Course began using the Carson Brothers incident to teach principles of asymmetric defensive operations. The Department of Agriculture's Rural Security Division found particular value in how Harrison had modified standard agricultural features for defensive purposes. Their analysts documented how ordinary ranch infrastructure, water management systems, equipment storage, livestock handling facilities had been subtly enhanced to provide tactical advantages without compromising their primary functions. This approach to dual-use infrastructure became a model for protecting vulnerable rural facilities. The international security community also took notice. NATO's Rural Defense Initiative sent observers to study how Harrison's principles could be applied to protecting isolated communities in conflict zones. The ability to create effective defensive capabilities without obvious militarization proved particularly valuable in areas where visible security measures might attract unwanted attention. What emerged from all these studies was a new understanding of how civilian defense could be approached in the modern era. Harrison had demonstrated that effective security didn't require choosing between normal operations and tactical preparation. Instead, he had shown how defensive capabilities could grow naturally from ordinary civilian activities, creating protection systems that remained invisible until needed. 18 months after the Carson Brothers incident, Whispering Pines Valley had undergone a subtle but profound transformation. The changes weren't immediately visible to casual observers. The ranches still operated as they always had, the community maintained its rural character, and daily life continued its familiar rhythms. Yet beneath this seemingly unchanged surface, Harrison's influence had reshaped how the entire community approached the concept of security and mutual protection. The local sheriff's department, under James Waters' leadership, implemented what became known as the Evergreen Protocol, a comprehensive approach to community defense that emphasized preparation and prevention over reaction and force. Deputies received specialized training in observation techniques Harrison had developed, learning to recognize potential threats while maintaining ordinary patrol routines. The emphasis shifted from visible law enforcement presence to subtle awareness and preparation. Dr. Sarah Chen's veterinary practice became a model for integrating medical preparedness into normal community operations. Other rural communities began studying how she had used regular veterinary rounds to establish and maintain emergency response networks without drawing attention. Her protocols for disguising medical caches as ordinary supply storage were adopted by clinics across 3 states, creating a network of prepared but unobtrusive medical response points. Martha Reynolds transformed her feed store into something far more sophisticated than its modest appearance suggested. While continuing to serve the agricultural community's normal needs, she developed systems for monitoring regional traffic patterns and maintaining awareness of unusual activity. Her methods for gathering and sharing information through ordinary business interactions became a template for rural intelligence networks nationwide. The local high school's agricultural program, under Harrison's quiet guidance, began incorporating elements of his defensive philosophy into its curriculum. Students learned not just about farming and ranching, but about situational awareness and environmental observation. The program's graduates emerged with skills that went far beyond traditional agricultural education, though these additional capabilities remained invisible to outside observers. Young Billy Waters' experience during the Carson Brothers incident led to the creation of a youth mentorship program that spread throughout the region. Under the guise of traditional ranch work and outdoor activities, participants learned advanced observation techniques and defensive principles. The program's success in developing capable, confident young people while maintaining absolute discretion attracted attention from youth development specialists nationwide. Local businesses began implementing Harrison's principles of discreet security enhancement. The bank modified its procedures based on his insights about psychological deterrence, while retail establishments adopted his methods for integrating defensive measures into normal operations. Even the local diner incorporated elements of his approach to environmental awareness, though customers would never notice the subtle improvements in security. The community's communication network evolved into something far more sophisticated than anyone outside the valley realized. Building on Harrison's model, residents developed methods for sharing critical information through ordinary social interactions. Weekly church services, livestock auctions, and community events became opportunities for coordinated security updates, all while maintaining their traditional functions. Ranchers throughout the valley began applying Harrison's principles to their own properties. Water management systems doubled as defensive positions, equipment storage incorporated observation posts, and livestock handling facilities included carefully planned escape routes. Yet to any outside observer, these modifications appeared to be nothing more than practical agricultural improvements. The local hunting club transformed into an informal but highly effective training ground for Harrison's defensive concepts. While maintaining its traditional role, the club integrated advanced marksmanship principles and tactical awareness into its regular activities. Members developed skills that went far beyond typical sporting purposes, though the true sophistication of their training remained invisible to casual observation. Dr. Chen's regular veterinary seminars evolved to include subtle elements of emergency response preparation. While officially focusing on animal care, these gatherings provided opportunities for medical professionals throughout the region to coordinate and prepare for potential crises. The network of prepared medical responders grew steadily, though their enhanced capabilities remained unobtrusive. Harrison's influence extended to how the community approached everyday challenges. His emphasis on thorough preparation and patient observation began to influence everything from local business practices to school security measures. The valley's residents learned to approach problems with the same methodical thoroughness that had proven so effective during the Carson Brothers incident. The transformation wasn't just about security. It represented a fundamental shift in how the community understood its own capabilities. Residents discovered that effective defense didn't require sacrificing their way of life or turning their homes into obvious fortresses. Instead, they learned to enhance their security through careful preparation and coordination while maintaining their community's traditional character. Perhaps most significantly, the valley's children grew up understanding concepts of awareness and preparation that went far beyond typical rural education. Through programs like Billy Waters' mentorship initiative and the enhanced agricultural curriculum, young people developed capabilities that would serve them well throughout their lives, all while appearing to be nothing more than traditional rural skills. 5 years after the Carson Brothers incident, the ripple effects of Harrison's defensive strategy continued to influence a new generation of security specialists worldwide. The quiet rancher's approach to integrated defense had evolved from a local success story into a fundamental shift in how security professionals approached the protection of vulnerable communities. His legacy lived on not just in tactical manuals and training programs, but in the transformed mindset of those responsible for defending others. The United States Military Academy at West Point incorporated the Harrison Doctrine into its advanced tactical studies curriculum. Cadets learned how the principles demonstrated at Evergreen Ranch could be applied to protecting civilian populations in conflict zones. Colonel Sarah Martinez, head of asymmetrical warfare studies, noted that Harrison had revolutionized their understanding of defensive operations. He showed us that true security isn't about overwhelming force. It's about making defense an organic part of everyday life. The FBI's Advanced Training Division developed an entire program based on Harrison's psychological approach to threat deterrence. Special Agent Michael Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, led the initiative to integrate these principles into federal law enforcement operations. What makes Harrison's method revolutionary, he explained to a class of senior agents, is how it transforms ordinary civilian infrastructure into a comprehensive defensive system without ever revealing its tactical capabilities. International defense contractors began incorporating Harrison's concepts into their facility protection designs. Rather than relying on obvious security measures, they focused on subtle modifications that served dual purposes. James Richardson, chief architect for Global Security Solutions, credited Harrison's influence. He taught us that the most effective defensive features are the ones that appear to have no defensive purpose at all. Dr. Sarah Chen's integration of medical preparedness into veterinary practice spawned a new field of study in emergency response planning. Medical schools across the country began offering specialized courses in discrete emergency preparation, teaching healthcare professionals how to build response capabilities that remained invisible until needed. The Chen Protocol became standard terminology in disaster preparedness circles. Young Billy Waters, now a respected instructor at the National Rural Law Enforcement Training Center, continued developing the principles he had learned during that crucial confrontation. His programs taught officers how to build community-based defense networks that operated beneath the surface of normal daily life. The most important lesson Harrison taught us, he often told his students, was that true strength lies in preparation that never needs to be demonstrated. The Carson brothers themselves, serving their sentences in federal prison, became unexpected ambassadors for Harrison's approach. Their experience had so profoundly impacted their understanding of professional capability that they began working with law enforcement to help other criminals understand the futility of violence against properly prepared communities. Marcus Carson's insights into how thoroughly Harrison's strategy had dismantled their tactical advantages proved invaluable for security planners. Harrison's influence extended into the private sector, where corporations began rethinking their approach to facility protection. Rather than relying on obvious security measures, companies learned to integrate defensive capabilities into normal business operations. Security consultants studied how Evergreen Ranch had maintained complete tactical superiority while appearing to be nothing more than a working horse farm. The academic community continued to analyze and expand upon Harrison's principles. The Journal of Defense Studies dedicated an entire issue to examining how his approach could be adapted to protect various types of vulnerable facilities. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison's comprehensive analysis, The Invisible Fortress, Defensive Integration in Civilian Infrastructure, became required reading in advanced security management programs. Perhaps most significantly, Harrison's legacy lived on in the transformed understanding of what constituted effective defense. Security professionals learned that true protection didn't require choosing between normal operations and tactical preparation. Instead, they discovered how defensive capabilities could grow naturally from ordinary activities, creating protection systems that remained invisible until needed. The rancher himself continued his quiet life at Evergreen Ranch, still training horses and maintaining his property with the same careful attention to detail that had made him legendary. He occasionally provided guidance to security specialists seeking to understand his methods, but always emphasized that his approach wasn't about specific tactics. It was about developing a comprehensive understanding of how defense could be integrated into normal life. As a new generation of security specialists emerged, influenced by Harrison's principles, they carried forward his most important lesson: that the most effective defense isn't about showing strength, but about developing capabilities that never need to be demonstrated until the crucial moment. His legacy lived on in countless facilities and communities worldwide, where ordinary-looking infrastructure concealed sophisticated defensive capabilities that most would never notice until they needed them. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.